We've already had a look at the ability to create shapes using the shape tools, things like stars, polygons, ellipses and rectangles. But what if we want to create some more fun shapes? And what I've done here is I've used Wingdings font to create a skull and a bomb. And what I want to do is create a shape layer from that. And it's very easy to do so. All I need to do is select my skull layer and go to Layer, Create Shapes from Text. And that's going to create a shape layer called Skull Outlines. Let's do the same for the bomb. Let's go to Layer, Create Shapes from Text. And now I can go in and I can do all sorts of amazing things with that. I can add operators to it. So I can do things like maybe add a repeater. And we get 3 skulls. Let's switch off our bomb for a second while we have a look at that. Now the repeater allows me to create multiple copies. And I can create as many copies as I want, and I can offset that so that they line up across the screen. And there's different ways of compositing them, either above or below each other. Now we also have transform settings for our repeater, so I can do things like scale them and have them scale up or down over time. And then I start to get some really great effects. I can do things like rotate them. Have them rotate over time, so I now have twisting skulls. And if I now offset that, I can get these amazing effects by animating the offset so that I go to 1 second and the skulls come running towards me and filling the screen. So let's preview that. There we go, we have some frightening skulls. And if I add motion blur to that, within a couple of seconds, without practicing, I've just created something fairly unique. So by using font symbols, you can create some really nice effects using shape layers. Now, obviously, I would adjust my composition settings and go into my motion blur and maybe go up to about 64 samples per frame, something like that, and bring my motion blur setting down a little bit to about 100. And now I'll get a much, much nicer quality blur as well. And you'll see that I can see the skulls a little bit more clearly. So repeaters are fantastic for creating these repeating animations of symbols. And if you use something like Webdings or Wingdings or Zapdingbats, you can get some really great symbol fonts to create some of these shapes for your animations. So again, we'll have a little look at that. So that's using a repeater. If we open up the bomb and go in here, we could add something to that. So let's add a wiggle paths operator to that. And if I preview that, you'll see now my bomb is wiggling around a little bit. I could go in here and I could increase the wiggles per second to 20 and maybe adjust the size of the wiggles, make them bigger or smaller, maybe make them more or less frequent, and I can also make smooth wiggles if I want to. So bring the size down and the frequency down. And then we get something really interesting like this. We've just got a kind of boiling bomb ready to go off. And of course, there are other things you could add to it. If you want to, you could add a stroke and stroke it with a colour. Come in here and choose like a bright colour that you want to stroke it with. And outline that. In fact, we can add multiple strokes using these shape layers. So let's add another stroke to it. And this one will add a different colour. So let's add the yellow again. So it's kind of layering the strokes. And we'll also adjust the position of it so it happens before the other one. Okay, so we start to layer strokes on top of each other and get all these amazing effects. So there we have our boiling bomb. Okay, other things that we can do. We can take vector shapes, and this is a new feature in version 6. We can take vector shapes now and we can convert them to shapes. So I choose Create Shapes from Vector Layer, and my Illustrator file is now a shape layer. And you know what happens when you have shape layers in 3D in AfterEffectsCS6? What we can do is we can go into 3D, we can choose Ray Traced 3D. Now I'm going to just drop to draft resolution for a second so you can see that in fast draft. And now if I open up my geometry options, I can extrude that. And if we have a look at that from a different angle, you'll see I'm adding depth to it. Now, if you consider, you can also do that with text as well. You have some really great options there. So we can add a bevel to it as well, maybe concave bevel, and adjust the bevel settings. And as soon as we add lighting to that, if I add a spotlight, for example, and click OK, and just adjust that spotlight. Let's just make it a bit brighter by pulling it out. You can see clearly how that's affecting my shape layer. Now I can still use things like operators on that. So I could put something like pucker and bloat on there and then get a really bizarre look to my 3D just by adjusting the pucker and bloat settings. I can start to create these amazing 3D shapes. Now that's going to take a little bit of time to render. So we have the spinning wheel of death coming up there. I'm on a Mac here without a supported graphics card. So if that happens to you and you just want to halt it rendering, just hit the caps lock key and that'll stop it rendering for a second. Okay, so we had a little bit of a crash there, to be honest. So be careful about applying operators, path operators, to 3D. Probably best to work in draft quality and not try and ray trace them, and take things a little bit easy if you don't have a supported graphics card like I don't. But I like pushing things to the limit, so I'm not going to worry too much. Anyway, here we are back in the comp again, and you'll notice here I have a little comp with some shape layer animation in it. Now it looks really complex and complicated, but I just want to show you how easy it is to create something like this. Now, if we have a look at these one by one, let's just have a look at that layer there. You can see there we have some flower shapes with a repeater on them. On top of that, we have a shape layer. And if I double hit the U key, you'll see I have a path with points on it. I can animate the points of the path. Everything that you see me do can be animated over time. So this is just to give you an idea of the kind of things that you can animate. We can animate the size of it. Start to get that kind of animation going on just by animating the size. All these kaleidoscopic animations. We can adjust the amount of ridges per segment and start to create more or less complicated stars by reducing or adding to that. Pucker and bloat that broke our 3D. By animating that, you can get the most amazing little animations. And once you start compositing these together, you can get a really amazing effect. So let's have a look at this flower here, and you can see the flower shape of the path outlined here. If we go into my shape settings, so just open up the contents, we can have a look at the repeater and you'll see that we've repeated lots of copies of the star there. Now we could go on doing that. We could go into our transform settings, maybe create a complete circle of them, adjust the scale as well over time. So we get more variation in scale. At the moment they're compositing on top of each other, so we have 50% opacity. We could adjust the opacity to blend them together a little bit more. And it's endless really what you can do. You can start to make more space between them by adjusting the anchor point or pull them closer together. Honestly, the creative possibilities are endless with shape layers. I just love playing with them. So we'll have a look at one more. That's a bit similar, so let's look at something else. And you can see by layering multiple layers of these on top of each other, how you can start to create a really nice effect. In fact, let's just preview the whole thing together. You can't really go wrong with this. And then when you composite it on top of footage, which I've done here, it's great for things like music videos and stuff for backgrounds. Really easy to create something completely unique using shape layers. So I really recommend that you get into using shape layers and playing around with them to see what you can come up with.